and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host, content creators, or the production company.
Welcome to the Foundations of Freedom with Jerome Huyler. A strong, vigorous economy runs on a division of labor. While some produce the goods, others provide the services we, the people, need and want. But behind everything we do, our work, our businesses, our daily lives, are the political decisions our leaders make in our name. Since we elect the men and women who write the laws that create the conditions in which we all prosper or perish, we all need to be fully informed political participants. The silent majority can no longer afford to remain silent. One of the most valuable services a free people require is the clarification of complex social, economic, and political ideas. Other media platforms offer biting commentary on the hot-button headlines of the day. This podcast service will explore the underlying causes of and the effective cures for what ails us. And this nation is ailing. Ultimately, to preserve the American dream, we will have to retrieve the principles that made that dream possible. But there are more pressing issues and concrete decisions to consider. So please stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the Foundations of Freedom podcast with Jerome Huyler. I understand, Jerome, that you would like to continue the conversation we had on the first podcast, episode number 1. Specifically, you'd like to answer the question, will promises made be promises kept? You seem a little bit doubtful. Why is that so, Jerome?
I am speaking to one specific issue. I think it is the single gravest problem that America now faces. It is being given short shrift by the major media and by our major political leaders. They talk about it now and again, but no one is really doing much about it. And if something isn't done about it before long, this country is going to face calamitous times. Now, what is the problem I'm speaking of? It is the reckless levels of government spending that we are witnessing today. Let me give you the summary. The country is now spending $7 trillion a year. The government is spending $7 trillion a year. Before COVID, it was spending a paltry $4.5 trillion a year. Now, after COVID, with all the spending of the Biden administration, spending totals go up to $7 trillion. $2 trillion of that is the annual budget deficit and deficits that are projected far into the future. What causes the deficits is that while we're spending $7 trillion, the IRS and all the other tax agencies are only taking in $5 trillion. So there is a $2 trillion annual budget deficit that is being chalked up every year. Now, $1 trillion of that is the cost of financing the accumulated $36+ trillion in accumulated debt. $1 trillion the government has to spend just to finance the annual interest charges on the bonds that come due every year. That's interesting.
That doesn't sound sustainable.
No, it is not. And that is my point. I hope our viewers do not get lost in the weeds. There's one more statistic that needs to be mentioned. Within the next 2 years, a full 40% of the accumulated $36 trillion is going to have to be refinanced. We're going to have to pay off the principal, borrow more money to keep the spending going. Otherwise, programs have to be cut, people have to do without. That is the basic fiscal situation the country now faces. It is dire. However, I'm going to reserve my observations about the present danger of this accumulated debt and reckless levels of spending for episode number 4, our next episode. In this episode, I just want to explain why, for all of his valiant, noble, and sincere efforts, Donald Trump will not succeed in cutting public spending sufficiently to avoid the problems this country faces. So next time, I'm going to mention all of the problems that arise from this level of spending and this accumulation of debt. This time, I'm going to explain why, for all of his sincere efforts, and his efforts are sincere, and Donald Trump is doing more to relieve us of the burden of this spending than any former president has. Any former president has. But no former president has had the problem that Donald Trump confronts. Okay, why not? First of all, when the Doge got underway under the auspices of Elon Musk, he thought he would be able to cut $2 trillion of government spending. In other words, erase the annual deficit by July 4th, 2026. To date, he claims to have cut $150 billion. That is hardly a drop in the bucket compared to the $2 trillion in annual deficits the government is running. So that does not look good. What is far worse, I believe, is that he is leaving Doge at the end of May. He is not going to be the one in charge. We don't know who will take his place. We don't know how aggressive that person will be, but it's doubtful that he's going to make the dent that Elon Musk was able to make over these last 3 months. Now, the major question for today is, why are the spending cuts under Donald Trump's administration inadequate to the problems that are to come? I'm going to mention 4 separate reasons why the spending cuts will not pan out. Reason number 1, Congress is filled with too many politicians. Politicians are besieged by one overriding concern: raising enough money to run for re-election. Running for re-election or elections in this country has become exceedingly expensive. There are the media purchases that have to be made for TV, for radio. There are the people who have to be hired to organize rallies and run the campaign. There are an amazing variety of costs associated with campaigning. The politicians must raise money every day of their term in order to have sufficient funds to run their re-election campaign. And for the House of Representatives, that occurs every 2 years. Every member of the House has to raise enough money to run a successful campaign every 2 years to stay in the House. Where do they get their money? In a word, lobbyists. In two other words, organized interests or organized special interests who hire the lobbyists to go to Washington to plead for special benefits, privileges, exemptions, and immunities. That's what lobbyists do. Politicians are loath to disappoint the lobbyists on whom they depend for their campaign contributions. That's where they get the majority of their money to run their elections. That's what they desperately need, because for a politician, there's nothing more important than winning the next election and staying in office. So, Republicans and Democrats are both in the same bind. They have something to get from the lobbyists and the organized special interests, and they have a lot to give in terms of all the subsidies, all the privileges they can write into law on behalf of those interests. If you want to call that corruption, and I do, that's the corruption of the American political system. We'll talk about what.
I was just gonna say, Jerome, that does not sound ethical or the way I'm sure it was intended to be. And even though I think, let's say some people, maybe not most, maybe not all, but some people are aware of this situation between lobbyists and politicians. I think a lot of people, and again, I don't want to put a label of most or less, whatever, but I think a lot of people who do know are maybe apathetic, like, oh, what can we do about it? It is the way it is, and some people just don't know about it. But it's not right in my opinion. It doesn't sound right that a small group of people with a lot of money should be able to dictate to our elected representatives what laws pass and which ones don't, right? I mean, that's not in our interest, it's in their interest, right?
I'm glad you raised those objections. I agree with you in every respect, but it's worse than that, because what all of this bargaining represents is benefiting special privileges at taxpayers' expense. All of those giveaways, all of those benefits that politicians provide, somebody has to pay for them. If they're direct subsidies, which in many cases there are, or loan guarantees, the taxpayer, that comes out of the taxpayer's hide. Taxpayers are paying for benefits that go to other people. Why I say that is the corruption of our system is because, we'll put it like this: if all are created equal, none are entitled to anything that someone else has to pay for. All are created equal. What do you mean Congress has an authority to pick winners and losers, to reward the winners at the losers' expense? That is a corruption of a system that I believe was meant for government to be a protector, protecting us all in the enjoyment of what we have, our lives, our liberties, our possessions, but not become a provider. But it began a long time ago. Before there was social welfare, there was corporate welfare, and corporate welfare is exactly what we're talking about. All the forms, including protective tariffs, which is just a form of protecting American industry, American businesses from foreign competition. Okay, that is the first reason, just the first reason why Donald Trump's efforts to cut spending are not going to work. The politicians can't afford to let there be huge cuts in spending when they benefit from all the spending that they do. The second reason is that every politician has not just a constituency of lobbyists and organized interests, but a down-home constituency. The people back home are certainly counting on their representative in Washington to bring the bacon back home, to fund schools, libraries, roads, infrastructure projects, and everything a community needs. They expect federal funds to provide at least some, if not all, or most of the funding. But the people back home don't understand that in order for their congressman or their senator to obtain the subsidy they desire, subsidy A, he will have to pledge his support for subsidies B through Z, and that they, the people all over the country, will be taxed to the teeth to pay for the whole alphabet of subsidies that Congress conveniently arranges. That is the second reason. And a politician who doesn't bring the bacon back home, well, he can be challenged by another primary opponent or general election opponent who says, you have a do-nothing congressman or senator, elect me, and I'll make sure the bacon gets to where it belongs, back home. If you get that, that is a second reason. So these are pressures that are placed on the politicians that militate against them voting for spending cuts. Third reason, there is a whole bunch of new spending that this nation desperately needs to underwrite. First of all, the cost of locating and deporting thousands, tens of thousands of migrants, that's an expensive proposition. It has enormous number of personnel working on it. They have to be paid. Transportation has to be paid. So that's just one aspect of continued spending that has to be appropriated. Donald Trump has proposed a $1 trillion improvement to American shipbuilding. We have been replaced by other countries that have been building ships. We need to restore our shipbuilding capacity in this country, and that's going to take an enormous amount of money that government is going to have to budget. There is something called an EMP, electrical magnetic pulse. An adversary can detonate a nuclear weapon, not on America, but hundreds of miles above America, which could knock out our entire electrical grid all over the country. There is a way of preventing that, and it's also going to cost billions and billions of dollars, and it is something this country desperately needs and has needed for a long time, especially with tensions in the world growing so much stronger. And there is a new thing, Israel's Iron Dome. Well, Donald Trump has proposed something this country desperately needs. He called it a Golden Dome. In other words, he is recommending that we underwrite a missile defense system that will protect the entire country from incoming missiles. The technology is there. Israel and the United States proved that when Iran launched all its missiles and drones at Israel, and I think only one got through. Hundreds and hundreds of missiles and drones were launched by Iran at Israel, and with the help of the United States, the naval fleet offshore, and Israel's own Iron Dome, they knocked down lifelessly every such missile attack. The cost of mounting such a missile, an anti-missile defense system for America is enormous, yet it is something that we desperately need. Russia and China already has hypersonic missiles that can go much, much faster than conventional missiles. We have not one hypersonic missile in our entire arsenal. We have to build a fleet of hypersonic missiles to pose the same threat against China and Russia that they presently have against us. And we have to replace all of the munitions, the arsenal that over the last 3 years has been given to Ukraine and to Israel. It has depleted America's arsenal, and those munitions also have to be replaced. So these are all the programs that are demand more spending, significantly more spending, at a time when we're running a $2 trillion deficit, spending $1 trillion to retire the interest charge, the annual interest charge on the accumulated debt. There's one more, fourth factor that I would name as to why the spending cuts will be woefully inadequate. And that is because the people, as Vlad alluded to already a little earlier, the people don't care. The people are politically apathetic. They are not enraged. They are not engaged in the political process. And as long as that is the case, it's the lobbyists and the organized interests that will rule Washington. Until and unless the people convince the politicians that all the campaign funding in the world will not save their seats from an aroused, enraged, engaged citizenry, nothing will happen. The pressures on the politician, the pressures to commit more spending in the near future will be too great. The people have to get involved in the political process intelligently. Intelligent political participation is the only thing that will save this country from facing the horrible future with all the hardship and suffering it will bring. And I'm going to explain all of that in our next episode. The people are the only ones who can forestall that problem and possibly reverse it.
Wow, thank you for that, Jerome. Now, that was something. Now, let's move on and go on to the topic of today's episode, which is politics is not a spectator sport. Right? So, what's your basic message to our viewers on that topic?
Okay. I finished off by saying until and unless the people of the United States write their congressmen, let their views be heard, and let their congressmen know that nothing will save their seats if they don't immediately begin cutting all this unnecessary spending. And by unnecessary, I don't mean just waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean seriously cutting spending, eliminating the $2 trillion deficit in one stroke, in 1 year or 2 years, cutting down. To do that, we're going to have to look at specific programs. I recommend that the people ask themselves, what must government do for us? And what must we be allowed and expected to do for ourselves? Or another way I put it, how limited was limited government meant to be? Now, what I want to do in this episode is get people who may not really be engaged in politics to understand how important it is to get so engaged. And I'm talking about a very wide spectrum of Americans. In my travels, in my public speaking tours, I have met hundreds of people who regard themselves as politically engaged. What makes them politically engaged? They get together in Tea Party groups, in Oath Keeper groups, in other civic organizations. They sit around, drink coffee, and talk about the terrible problems of the day. All the troubles that Biden created, all the good things Donald Trump promises to do and is trying to do genuinely. And that's it. I almost became persona non grata when addressing a number of these groups. I chided them on their inaction. In other words, you're not an American patriot because you know all the problems Joe Biden created, or the problems Barack Obama created, or you wave a flag on Flag Day. It involves active participation in the political process, and that means making your feelings felt. I once heard a congressman say that if he got 35 letters on a particular topic, he would look into that topic personally. 35 letters. If hundreds and hundreds of constituents begin making their feelings known, that if you don't cut programs sufficiently to stave off the future calamities we face, you will lose your seat in Congress. You will never again be a United States Senator. You had better act, and you had better show me what you're doing to dramatically cut the reckless levels of spending you all have been enacting over the last 2, 3, 4 decades. That's what political participation is. Intelligent political participation, not running off on your last and strongest emotion, but understanding what it is government's role must be and should be. Now, if you are like most people, even those who are patriots and wave the flag, if you are like most people, you do not pay sufficient attention to politics, and you do not engage in the political process actively. Why not? I am going to list a number of factors, I believe, that explain America's apathy. And the point is, the majority can no longer afford to remain silent. It is going to be far, far too costly, and costly in the not too distant future. So, in order to change our behavior, and this is general, we have to understand what our behavior has been and why we have been behaving in such a manner. So, I'm going to list a number of motivations that explain political apathy in America and explain why they are self-destructive policies that will haunt you in the end. Number one, getting involved in politics means getting into arguments with your wife, with your husband, with your children, with your parents, and it just creates so much dissension and ill will and leads to arguments and fighting. I don't want to be involved in politics at all. It's too painful. It divides people. It divides families. What is my answer? Don't get involved in political arguments. But that doesn't mean don't get involved in politics. It is in your own self-interest to know what your representatives are doing in your name, and to make sure they are doing the right thing that isn't going to come back to haunt you big time today or tomorrow. Your family doesn't agree with you politically. You hate Trump. They love Trump. You love Trump. They hate Trump. Don't talk about Trump. don't talk about politics. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't become politically engaged, politically active. Now, there are three main sources of political apathy, aside from that issue, the issue of dissension. One I call cynicism. It is the feeling that the politicians are all corrupt, or they're all the same, or they'll make promises that they have no intention of keeping, or they will tell you what they think you want to hear. And when they get in office, they'll go back to their standard policy of capitulating to the lobbyists and the organized interests that fund their campaigns, and they'll leave you in the dust. That's true. That's who politicians are. They are self-interested and not interested in solving your problems, but that's all the more reason for you to get involved in politics. We elect the people that write the laws, that create the conditions in which we all prosper or perish. It is not out of altruistic self-sacrifice that you need to get politically involved. It is in your own self-interest. You're going to learn by the next episode what price you are paying and how greater the price will be in the not too distant future if you remain apathetic and complacent. Now, the second of the three big reasons that people are apathetic, I call not cynicism, being cynical about the politicians and what they really represent. That is true. But skepticism. You may accidentally put on a TV program and see a liberal debating with a conservative. And when the liberal has his time to talk, you say, this guy makes all the sense in the world. And when the conservative comes up to answer the liberal, you say to yourself, this guy makes as much sense as the liberal did. The experts don't even agree. How can I know what to do, what is right? And so they tune out. That's the second. Cynicism is the first. Skepticism is the second. How am I to know what to do? Well, let me just say, you can know what to do. And to toot my own horn, if you tune into these episodes, this podcast series, you will hear the honest to goodness truth about what this country needs to do to right its ship. The third motive for apathy I call pragmatism. In other words, people are busy enough tending to the issues that are closest to them. People are just trying to make ends meet, searching for the promotion, planning the next vacation, dealing with family squabbles and difficulties. It is enough for the typical family to just do what it needs to hold its head above water and walk a straight line. Who has time for politics? Well, I would tell those people who are pragmatists, as I call them, that you don't have time not to engage in politics. While you are busy taking care of your own family matters, dealing with the things that are most personal to you, and those are the things that are most important, that must be the most important. But the politicians are out making your life so much more difficult. I say this, any family that is paying above 50% in combined federal, state, local income taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes, utility taxes, estate taxes, capital gains taxes, Social Security taxes, is already half slave and half free. If you were free, the money you earn, you would own. It would be yours to spend. Look how better your life would be if your family didn't have to pay the 40, 50, 60% in taxes that go to all levels of government. That is just one way in which politics directs you personally, and which in self-defense you have to begin paying closer attention to. Those are the reasons, the primary reasons, I believe, why people do not pay enough attention to politics. To reiterate, it is to survive yourselves, for your personal survival, that you have to get engaged in politics and address the particular problem of these reckless levels of public spending, this mounting accumulated national debt, again, now $36 trillion, approaching $37 trillion, with all of the fiscal problems that creates. That is why the majority can no longer afford to remain silent. And I've been saying that ever since I wrote my first pamphlet, which was called "The Majority Can No Longer Afford to Remain Silent." How do you do? Except the pamphlet was written in 1976, published in 1976, just as Jimmy Carter was winning his presidential election against Gerald Ford. And by the way, Gerald Ford, a quote I use very often, Gerald Ford in 1976, debating Jimmy Carter on television, reminded us a government that is big enough to give you anything you want is big enough to take everything you have. That, incidentally, was the name of a book, my second book, that's still available on Amazon. Now, next time, I am going to detail the specific dangers, the dire threats that these reckless levels of government spending pose for the country, what hardships they are creating today for business, and what far graver hardships they promise to create in the not too distant future. That will be the subject of our next episode, episode number 4 of the Foundations of Freedom.
Right. Thank you so much, Jerome. Another great episode. Amazing talk. Loved it. I'm sure all the viewers are going to love it and respond. Please like this podcast on whatever platform you're watching it on, whether it's YouTube or Quora or LinkedIn. Please like, please subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, make it go viral, and stay involved. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, it's very important that we get involved. And that's what one of the many reasons that we're doing this podcast is to get everybody involved. It doesn't matter, left, right, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. We're all Americans, right? So let's get involved. Let's get involved in the process of this democracy, and then we can all make a change in a positive direction. Thank you so much, Jerome. Looking forward to the next episode.
Thank you, Rod.
Dominate Google search results and drive real high-quality leads to your business. Turn clicks into customers now. Get your free SEO audit today at setupshoponline.com. Make sure to connect with Jerome Huyler on Quora and LinkedIn, and check out his most recently published article on Mises.org, Not Worth a Transcontinental, Railroading a Nation into Prosperity, and get his latest books, or any of his books, on Amazon.com.